And I'm joined today by Michael M. Rosen, who contributed to the magazine's cover package on the October 7th terrorist attacks on Israel, looking 2 years on. Michael, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Jim. It's my pleasure.
So, Michael, one of the things that you brought to the table in writing about this is you're writing from the perspective of somebody who's actually in Israel, not just writing about this from Washington, D.C. Could you walk us through a little bit what it's been like, what the Israeli experience has been like during this 2 year war?
Sure. I've been living here with my family now for more than a decade. And 2 years ago, on October the 7th, I was here with my family. I commute back and forth quite a bit, but I was here on that day. And ever since then, life really hasn't been the same. It's and we think of our experience here living in Israel as before the 7th and after the 7th. And it's certainly been a very challenging time. Also, in some ways, a very moving time, almost a very spiritual time in some ways. And we're hoping against hope, especially in light maybe of a comprehensive deal that seems to be in the works because of the press conference earlier this week. If things continue to move down that road, that hopefully we can get to a place where we can restore a sense of normalcy that's been missing in this country for the last 2 years.
So there have been some pretty significant Israeli military successes during this campaign. Also, some things that have seemed to be a little bit more of a slog. Walk us through where you see things standing militarily right now.
So as I went through in the piece, there have indeed, Jim, been some real signal victories and really important geostrategic type victories that have in some ways reset the entire clock in the region, specifically when it comes to Iran and all of Iran's different proxies that including Hamas, have been responsible for October 7th and the attacks that have occurred since then as well. If we think of the war that was launched on October the 7th as something like a seven-front attack, meaning both Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, Iran, Iraq, and even Yemen, all of which have been part of what the Iranians like to call the ring of fire that they've built around Israel. That ring has possibly, without them intending it to be the case, that ring has started to actually become extinguished in some ways. Israel's put out the fire on many fronts. And with one big exception, which we'll come back to, and that is Gaza itself, it's actually been a time, a 2 year period of some very significant triumphs. And beginning in Lebanon to the north, the Hezbollah, which is the strongest and mightiest, most fearsome army up in the north and one of the strongest in the Middle East, was neutered by Israel. We marked last week marked the 1 year anniversary of the decapitation strike that Israel launched on the Secretary General of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, who had been the fearsome leader of this group that had been really tormenting Israel for a very long time, and in particular since the 7th. And this is a group that had as many as 150,000 rockets trained on Israel, on its neighbor to the south, not exactly a neighbor, but an adversary. And Israel managed to take out a tremendous amount of that, to the point now that the very unstable Lebanese government now may actually be in a position to consolidate its gains and essentially marginalize Hezbollah and maybe bring some amount of normalization to the country. So that's one good thing that happened. The next good thing that happened next door to Lebanon in Syria, where the odious and murderous regime of Bashar al-Assad disappeared suddenly in December of last year, of 2024, when Hezbollah, which had been supporting them, and again, Hezbollah is a group that had been funded by Iran, they were no longer able to support their patrons cat's paw in terms of Bashar Assad in Syria, and Assad disappeared, fled to Russia, and his cruel and despotic regime was wiped off the face of the earth. Now, what's come next? The regime now of Ahmed al-Shara, a former ISIS fighter, Al Qaeda fighter, real arch terrorist, has purported to have changed his spots and is talking a big game about launching a liberal, a tolerant regime in Syria. We'll see if that's the case, but at a minimum, what's happening now is certainly worlds better than what happened before, and Iranian influence has been neutered there too. And then the big real 1,000-pound gorilla is Iran itself, and of course in the 12-day war, which began in June of this year, Israel managed to launch a surprise and extremely successful attack in which the United States joined hand in glove to take out the Iranian nuclear facilities, to degrade them significantly. Exactly how much we don't know, but it was certainly a massive attack. And that part has all the nuclear program and the ballistic missiles, of which Iran had thousands targeting Israel as well. Those have now been laid to waste. So they're not going to take it lying down, of course, the Iranians, and they're already trying to get back on their feet with their weapons program and with their ballistic missiles program. Thankfully, over last weekend, sanctions went back into effect even from the European countries that had long been more sympathetic to Iran than the United States had been. Those are now what are called the snapback sanctions are now in effect, and those will hopefully continue to squeeze the regime. So that's the good news. Let me pause there, or I'm happy to jump into the not so good news as well, unless you wanted me to follow up on something else.
Sure. I mean, obviously, the further we get from October 7th, we've seen some movement of the international community, particularly Europe, away from Israel for the duration of the Gaza campaign. Where do you see things sort of shaking out there?
So that's where I would highlight, and I think it's an excellent point. That's where I would highlight much more mixed success, success mixed with, frankly, some pretty dangerous, I would even say failures on certain fronts in terms of Israel's war. And really what that comes down to has been the fighting in Gaza and everything that has grown out from that. So, of course, viewers will remember that on the 7th, Hamas itself, a terror group that was ruling the coastal Gaza Strip, which borders Israel, surged across that border. Thousands of Hamas soldiers, terrorists, militants invaded Israel, murdered over 1,200 people, the vast majority of whom were civilians, and took 250 hostage. And that's what kicked off the war most formally. And since then, Israel has been battling to get its hostages back, to wipe out Hamas, and to make sure that Hamas never rules in the Gaza Strip any longer. That has been a much more mixed result there for Israel than some of the cleaner victories that it has seen across the region. And unfortunately, the successes have been, and we'll start with those, that of the 250 hostages, 200 of them have come home. Some have been rescued. Some have been repatriated through different interim deals, swaps of prisoners that Israel engaged in with Hamas. Over 20,000 Hamas fighters have been killed by Israeli forces, which is a great success. On the other hand, it's been 2 years. The war is still ongoing. There have been, unfortunately, many civilians killed in Gaza as well. And that's because Hamas itself embeds itself in the civilian infrastructure,
Right.
digging tunnels underneath hospitals and mosques and storing weapons and bases throughout high-rise apartments and everywhere in the Strip, such that they put their own civilians at grave peril, which is itself a terrible war crime. But in any event, Israel, for better or for worse, has been held, I would say for worse, unfortunately, has been held liable by much of the international community, and not just the radical regimes such as Iran that want to see Israel wiped off the face of the earth, but even by some friendly countries or would be friendly countries, should be friendly countries in
Mm.
Western Europe. And that has been very difficult for Israel as well. And the fact that there are still 48 hostages, of whom we think around 20 are still living and 28 have fallen, and whether in battle or were taken hostage while dead already. Those include, by the way, my cousin Alon Ohel. May he be speedily returned, and may they all be speedily returned.
Yes.
But it's a source of great frustration and anguish for Israelis. In addition to that, several hundred Israeli soldiers have fallen in Gaza. And these are not just numbers. This is a small country. So
Right.
these are sons and sons-in-law of friends of ours. These are friends of our children. It's a small country and a family. And those losses have been very, very heavy and hard to take. So there's no question that the Israeli people are ready for this all to end. We want to get our people back. We want the fighting to end. We want our exhausted soldiers to be able to return home. And we want to get back to normal. We want to reestablish our place in the world and try to undo some of the harm that unfortunately we've suffered over the course of these 2 years.
So, what do you make of the press conference between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu and the unveiling of this Gaza peace proposal?
So it's still a little bit early and hard to say how it's all going to play out. But however, if things do play out in the way that President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu laid out during that press conference earlier this week, I'm actually very optimistic that this could potentially really bring a final end to the fighting, at least for the medium to maybe long term. And
Mhm.
it could spark some greater things. And let's kind of unpack that a little bit. So, according to this proposal, there would be Israel would begin to withdraw from portions of Gaza City and portions of the strip that it is where its troops are currently stationed. And and within 72 hours of that initial withdrawal, all of the Israeli hostages would come home in exchange for 250 hardened Hamas terrorists who were being held by Israel, including terrorists with blood on their hands having murdered Israelis. It's a very painful thing to have to imagine making a trade of something like that, but
Mhm.
such are the realities in the Middle East. In addition to another, I believe the number is about 1,700 Palestinians Gazan fighters who have been arrested and detained and taken prisoner during the current war, in addition to these long-term prisoners. And then there would be some form of international organization. I think the president referred to it as the Board of Peace. And there would be different components, including some of the neighboring Arab countries with whom Israel has friendly relations, such as Egypt and Jordan and the United Arab Emirates. Other Arab countries as well, such as Qatar and Saudi Arabia, would act as guarantors for what would replace the Hamas regime. And under the plan, Hamas would agree to demilitarize and to not take part in any governance in the Strip. And if assuming that they agree to this proposal and actually honor it, then we could really be on the way to ending this conflict, to ending at least the current phase of the conflict. I'm hopeful, or I'm optimistic might be too strong of a word, but I certainly tried to be hopeful about where we could wind up with this.
It would be a phenomenal development after all these years of war.
It certainly would. I mean, this has always been the dream of Zionism, frankly. And unfortunately, Zionism gets a bad rap in the progressive world and much of Western Europe. But as a sort of ethno-nationalist type of movement, what it is a movement for Jews to be free in their country and to be part of the world, to be a respected part of the region and the world in which we live. That's really all that it is, and that's all that we want. And hopefully we're getting there slowly but surely.
Thank you for joining us, Michael.
Thank you so much for having me, Jim.
If you're watching us on YouTube, you can read Michael's full story by clicking here on our digital magazine.